This is not a story about weakness. It is a story about intensity, about a fire inside that never learned where to go. Some people break loudly, others break in silence. They smile, they function, they survive. But inside, something keeps pulling them toward escape, not because they love destruction, but because they feel too much. Addiction does not begin with substances. It begins with pressure, with depth that has no outlet, with a mind that sees more, feels more, and carries more than it was taught how to hold. So it searches for relief, for quiet, for something to soften the weight of being alive. The world calls it a bad habit, a lack of control, a moral failure. But that label misses the truth, because addiction is rarely about pleasure. It is about silence, about shutting down the noise inside when life feels too loud. There are people who drink to forget, people who scroll to disappear, people who consume, chase, repeat, not because they are empty, but because they are overwhelmed. The mind was not built to carry meaning without direction. When purpose is blocked, energy turns inward, it twists. It looks for exits, and addiction becomes one of them. This struggle is usually invisible, no medals, no sympathy. Just a private war fought behind closed doors, a war between who you are and who you feel forced to be. Deep down there is a knowing, a quiet voice that says, "This is not why you're here." But that voice is painful, because listening to it means change, and change feels like death to the familiar self. So the cycle continues, craving, relief, shame, repeat, not because you are broken, but because something vital is being ignored. Psychology shows that the strongest addictions often belong to the most sensitive minds, people with deep awareness, strong imagination, unusual emotional range. The same traits that create artists, leaders, and visionaries also create suffering when they are suppressed. When these traits have no direction, they turn into self-soothing behaviors. When they are misunderstood, they turn into self-escape. The mind does not want to self-destruct. It wants to survive the pressure of an unlived life. And this is the part few people talk about. Addiction is often the soul's protest, a refusal to accept a shallow existence. A scream that has no language yet. That is why force rarely works. Punishment rarely heals. Because the problem is not the substance. The problem is disconnection. Disconnection from meaning, from identity, from something larger than routine survival. Inside every addictive pattern is a question. What am I meant to do with this energy? What is this pain trying to point me toward? Ignore the question and the behavior grows stronger. Face it, and the entire struggle begins to change. This video is not here to judge. It is here to reveal. Because when you understand the root, the shame loses its grip. And when shame dissolves, clarity appears. If you stay until the end, you will not just understand addiction differently. You will see how the very thing that tried to destroy you may be the same force meant to guide you towards your highest calling. Not by accident, but by design. The mind is not chasing destruction, it is chasing relief. When inner tension builds without release, the brain looks for shortcuts, not to feel good, but to feel less. Less pressure, less noise, less weight. Neuroscience shows that the brain is wired to avoid pain before it seeks pleasure. So when emotional pain has no language, no outlet, no direction, the mind improvises. It finds patterns that numb, patterns that distract, patterns that create a temporary pause from the storm inside. Escape feels like control. For a moment, everything slows down, thoughts soften, the body relaxes, the mind finally breathes. That moment becomes memorable. The brain learns fast. This works, it says, and what begins as relief slowly turns into repetition. But here is the deeper truth. The mind does not cling to escape because it is weak. It clings because it is overloaded. When meaning is missing, stimulation replaces it. When purpose is blocked, dopamine becomes a substitute. When direction is unclear, habits become anchors. The modern world accelerates this pattern. Constant pressure, constant comparison, constant performance. Very little stillness, very little depth. For sensitive minds, this becomes unbearable. So escape turns into a coping strategy, not a conscious choice, an automatic response. The problem is not desire. Desire is natural. The problem is misplaced desire, energy flowing into something that cannot fulfill it. Addiction thrives where awareness is high but expression is low, where potential is present but unused, where the inner world is rich, yet the outer life feels narrow. This creates a split. One part of the mind knows something is wrong. Another part just wants peace. So the cycle continues. Relief becomes routine. Routine becomes dependence. Dependence becomes identity. And slowly, the mind forgets why it started escaping in the first place. Not because the truth disappeared, but because it was never given space to speak. Escape is not the enemy. It is a signal. A sign that the mind is asking for a deeper solution. Not suppression, not distraction, but alignment. When the mind stops running from pain, it begins listening to it. And when it listens, something unexpected happens. The escape loses its power because the message is finally being heard. When something keeps repeating in your life, it is not random. The mind does not waste energy without a reason. Patterns exist to communicate. And addiction is one of the loudest patterns the psyche can create. The mistake is treating it like an enemy to be crushed. Because fighting a signal does not remove it. It strengthens it. The mind resists being silenced when it has something important to say. Addiction is not the problem. It is the alarm. An alarm does not exist to annoy you. It exists to wake you up, to warn you that something deeper needs attention. Every addictive pull carries information about unmet needs, unexpressed emotions, unlived potential. The behavior is only the surface. The real story lives underneath. In the tension you avoid, in the truth you postpone, in the life you sense but have not stepped into. Psychology shows that symptoms often appear where growth is blocked. When development stops, energy has nowhere to go, so it loops. It circles the same behaviors, the same urges, the same escapes. This is why removing the habit without understanding the message often fails. The mind simply finds a new outlet, a different distraction, a different form of numbing. Because the root was never addressed, the signal remains active until it is understood. Addiction points toward the exact area of life where courage is required, the place where responsibility feels heavy, where identity feels uncertain, where potential feels intimidating. Instead of asking, how do I stop this? The deeper question is, what is this trying to protect me from facing? Because addiction always protects something. It shields you from fear, from disappointment, from the risk of becoming who you actually are. This is why shame is so destructive. Shame tells you to hide, to silence the signal, to turn away from the very message that could free you. When shame dissolves, curiosity appears, and curiosity changes everything. You stop seeing yourself as broken. You begin seeing yourself as misdirected, and misdirection can be corrected. The moment you treat addiction as information instead of identity, power returns. You are no longer at war with yourself. You are in conversation with something deeper. And when that conversation begins, the struggle starts to transform. Pain is not random. It is precise. It appears where growth is required but resisted. Once addiction is seen as a signal, pain stops being meaningless. It becomes directional. It points, not outward, inward. Psychology shows that the mind intensifies discomfort when something essential is being avoided, not to punish, but to push awareness forward. Pain increases when the soul is outgrowing the life it is living. This is why numbing never truly works. The relief is temporary, but the pain returns stronger. Because the message was delayed, not answered. Pain highlights what matters most. If it hurts deeply, it is connected to something important. Something personal, something tied to identity and purpose. People often believe purpose should feel inspiring, clear, comforting, but purpose usually announces itself through tension, through restlessness, through dissatisfaction with the ordinary. The mind senses a larger capacity waiting to be used, and when that capacity is ignored, pain fills the gap. This pain is misunderstood as damage, but it is actually pressure. Pressure forms diamonds. Pressure builds strength. Pressure prepares responsibility. Avoiding pain keeps life small. Facing pain expands it. When you sit with discomfort instead of escaping it, clarity begins to form. Patterns reveal themselves. Truth surfaces. You start noticing what drains you and what energizes you. Pain exposes false paths. It strips away what no longer fits. Old identities crack. Outdated beliefs collapse. This feels like loss, but it is refinement. The struggle does not mean you are off track. It often means you are closer than you think, closer to a life that demands more from you, more honesty, more courage, more responsibility. Purpose is not discovered by avoiding pain. It is uncovered by moving through it consciously. When pain is approached with awareness, it transforms. from suffering into guidance, from chaos into direction. The moment you stop asking how to escape pain and start asking what it is shaping you for, everything changes. Because pain is not blocking your path, it is carving it. What looks like a flaw is often misplaced power. The intensity behind addiction is not weakness. It is energy without direction. Obsession requires focus. Craving requires imagination. Endurance requires resilience. These are not small traits. They are strong ones turned inward instead of forward. Psychology shows that the same neural circuits involved in addiction are also involved in mastery, repetition, commitment, deep engagement. The mind does not suddenly become powerful because of addiction. It was powerful already. When this energy has no meaningful target, it collapses into loops. The mind circles the same relief because it has nowhere else to invest itself. But the force itself is neutral. It can destroy, or it can build. Many high achievers share the same inner wiring, intensity, sensitivity, restlessness. The difference is not in the energy. It is in where the energy is aimed. Obsession becomes dangerous when it is unconscious, when it runs without purpose. But when awareness enters, the same force can be redirected. This is why willpower alone rarely works. You cannot suppress energy that wants expression. Suppression creates pressure. Pressure eventually explodes. Transformation begins when energy is given a higher task, something demanding, something meaningful, something that requires discipline instead of escape. The craving for relief is actually a craving for engagement, for immersion in something real, something that absorbs attention fully, something that gives effort a reason. When that reason appears, obsession loosens its grip, not because desire disappears, but because desire evolves. This is where self-respect begins to grow. When energy is no longer wasted, when effort creates progress instead of shame, you start noticing something important. The same drive that once pulled you downward can now pull you forward. Strength does not need to be eliminated. It needs to be trained. When intensity is guided, it becomes purpose. When focus is aligned, it becomes mastery. When obsession is aimed correctly, it becomes devotion. What once felt like a curse reveals itself as capacity. Not everyone carries this level of inner force, but those who do are called to something demanding. The question is no longer how to stop the obsession. The real question becomes where it truly belongs. There comes a moment when the old ways stop working. The escape no longer numbs. The relief no longer satisfies. The identity built around coping begins to collapse. This is not failure. This is exposure. The ego survives on control and image. It wants quick fixes. It wants certainty. It wants to believe it is managing life. But addiction eventually strips that illusion away. It reveals the truth underneath the performance. The truth that something real has been avoided. When the ego breaks, it feels terrifying, because the familiar story dissolves. The one that said, "This is who I am." The one that said, "This is all I can be." Psychology shows that identity crisis often precedes transformation. The old self must loosen before a deeper one can emerge. Confusion is not regression, it is reorganization. In this collapse, silence appears. And in silence, something honest speaks, not loudly, not dramatically, but persistently, a sense that life requires more responsibility, more truth, more alignment between who you are and how you live. This is the moment many people run from. Because it demands sacrifice, comfort must be traded for meaning. Familiar pain must be exchanged for unfamiliar effort. But this is where the calling lies, not in pleasure, not in ease, but in necessity. The calling does not beg, it waits, and when distractions fall away, it becomes impossible to ignore. You begin to feel drawn towards something demanding, something that scares you slightly. Something that feels heavy but right. This is not random desire. It is the psyche reorganizing around purpose. The ego wanted relief. The deeper self wants responsibility. When the ego loses control, the soul gains a voice. And that voice does not ask for escape. It asks for commitment. This is the turning point, where the struggle stops being about survival and starts becoming about meaning. What rises after the breakdown is not weakness. It is direction. And once direction appears, life is no longer something to flee from. It becomes something to answer. The desire does not disappear when awareness arrives. It changes shape. What once pulled you toward escape now asks for direction. Craving is energy, raw, restless, persistent. It was never meant to be erased. It was meant to be claimed. When commitment replaces compulsion, the inner conflict begins to settle. Not because life becomes easier, but because effort finally has meaning. Psychology shows that the mind stabilizes when it commits to something larger than comfort. When actions serve a purpose beyond relief, discipline stops feeling like punishment. It starts feeling like alignment. Commitment demands structure, routine, responsibility. These are not limitations. They are containers for intensity. Without structure, energy leaks. With structure, it builds. This is where many people hesitate, because commitment removes excuses. It asks for consistency. It asks for presence even when motivation fades. But this is exactly what transforms craving. The mind learns a new pattern. Effort leads to growth. Consistency leads to progress. Progress creates meaning. The same repetition that once fueled addiction now builds skill. The same focus that once narrowed life now expands it. The same hunger that once consumed now creates. Commitment is not about perfection. It is about direction. Showing up even when the mind resists. Acting in alignment even when emotion fluctuates. Over time, something shifts. The urge to escape weakens. Not because desire is gone, but because desire has been fulfilled differently. You begin to trust yourself again. Trust grows when promises are kept, especially the quiet ones. This is where identity starts to change. You no longer see yourself as someone fighting urges. You see yourself as someone building something. The mind responds to that identity. It adapts. It supports what you consistently choose. Craving was never the enemy. It was misdirected devotion. When devotion finds a purpose, peace follows. Not a passive peace, an earned one. This is how transformation becomes sustainable. Not through resistance, but through commitment that gives energy a future. Healing is not comfortable. It never has been. The easy path leads to temporary relief. The hard path leads to transformation. The mind resists what it cannot control. It avoids what challenges its habits. But true growth begins where comfort ends. Discipline is not punishment. It is protection. Protection from repeating patterns that drain your life. Protection from the same traps that once promised escape. Every choice matters, even small ones. Each time you face discomfort and stay, you reinforce strength. Each time you act in alignment with your purpose, you reclaim yourself. Psychology shows that consistent effort rewires the brain. Neural pathways that once led to compulsion now lead to mastery. The same mind that learned to escape now learns to endure, to create, to thrive. The hard path demands presence. It asks you to feel without numbing, to confront fear without running, to meet pain without denying it. This is where courage becomes practice. Not the heroic, dramatic kind, but the quiet, daily kind. The kind that builds resilience one moment at a time. Commitment without challenge is hollow. Ease without effort is empty. The mind only grows when it meets resistance. This is also where self-respect is forged. When you honor your own capacity to endure. When you choose effort over avoidance. When you act even when it is difficult. The process is never linear. There will be setbacks. Temptations will return. Old patterns will call. But each choice to persist strengthens the connection to your purpose. Each small victory over avoidance builds momentum. Each act of courage rewires identity. The hard path is not punishment, it is invitation. Invitation to become more than the person defined by escape, to step fully into your own life, to reclaim energy, focus, and vision that once flowed into distraction. The path that heals is never easy, but it is the only path that leads to lasting freedom. And when you take it, the rewards are beyond what temporary pleasure could ever offer. Addiction is not the end, it is a doorway. A painful, intense doorway that most people fear to enter. It exists to wake you up, to show you the depth of your energy, your sensitivity, your strength, to reveal what has been ignored, suppressed, or denied. The patterns that once trapped you are not meaningless. They carry a message, a call to look deeper, to question who you are, to challenge who you have been willing to settle for. Every urge, every craving, every moment of discomfort is a signal pointing toward growth, purpose. When you understand this, the fear of addiction loses its power. It no longer dominates your life, it becomes a guide. Psychology shows that intense experiences often precede breakthroughs. When energy is too strong to be contained by avoidance, it pushes toward transformation. Addiction is one of the most extreme forms of this energy. It is a mirror reflecting both your capacity for self-destruction and your potential for greatness. The door is painful. It demands honesty. It demands responsibility. It demands courage. It will not let you pass without confronting the parts of yourself you have long ignored. But the door is also an invitation to turn the very force that once consumed you into power, to channel craving into devotion, to redirect obsession toward creation. What lies beyond is not just freedom from addiction. It is freedom for life, for purpose, for alignment with the person you were always meant to become. The journey is not easy. It is rarely linear, but it is necessary, because the doorway does not appear for the comfortable, the passive, or the fearful. It appears for the ones willing to face themselves fully. Addiction was never meant to be your prison. It was meant to be your teacher, your challenge, your call to awaken. Step through the door with courage. The struggle itself becomes your guide, and on the other side you will find not only relief from craving, but clarity, purpose, and the power of a life fully claimed.